What's up, everybody, and welcome to Malt Muser Whiskey Reviews. I am Eric. It is the end of 2020, and so I'm going to count down my top 5 whiskeys that I got to taste this year. But first, before we jump into those, I just want to send a shout out and a thank you to everybody for the support this year. It's been a lot of fun, whether you've just been tuning into the reviews, been joining on the Tuesday happy hours. It's been really great. We did set up a Patreon for the channel this year, so if you're interested in supporting the channel, feel free to check out patreon.com/maltmuserwhiskey, and you can become a Patreon supporter. I do release stuff periodically on Patreon exclusive to Patreon supporters, and your support ensures that we can continue the channel going here and try more delicious whiskey going into 2021. So before we begin, I have 2 honorable mentions, both coming from the same distillery. These 2 didn't quite make my top 5, and I'll tell you why. But the first one is Springbank 15 years old, 46% non-chill filtered natural color, absolutely delicious whiskey. This is a step up from their 10-year-old, a much more heavily sherried version of Springbank, and really just checks all the boxes. The reason that it didn't quite make my top 5 is honestly because of the price. The prices for Springbank here in the United States have went up really significantly over the last year, and this bottle is now in that $150 range, which I think is just a bit too much for what you're getting here, but you can still find them out there at a reasonable price. Grab it without hesitation. Springbank 15 makes the honorable mention. The second is from Springbank's peated line, which is the Long Row. This is the 13 years old Chilean Cabernet Sauvignon cask. This one's bottled 51.6%. And again, non-chill filtered natural color. This is from their Red series, which is all different wine cask finishes. And this is an absolute stunner. I just got this recently and have not been able to do a full review of it. So I don't want to put it in the top 5, but I will say from what I've had of it so far, it's absolute stunner. This one you're going to find right around that $120 range. I think it's a great buy, 13-year-old age statement. Keep your eyes peeled for the Long Row Red 13 Chilean Cabernet Sauvignon cask, or really any of the Long Row Red series. Okay, with that, let's get into the top 5. Coming in at number 5, Deanston, 2008. This is the Bordeaux red wine cask matured whiskey. This is about 9 years old, bottled at 58.7% ABV. Absolute killer. Deanston is a distillery that does fly a bit under the radar for a lot of folks, and so might not be something that you've heard of or got to try before. I highly recommend checking out stuff in their line, but especially this one. This was one of the first fully wine matured whiskeys I had, and it's an absolute stunner. Really, really complex, rich, delicious red fruit notes. This thing ticks all the boxes. You would think it was older than it is, given it's only 9 years, just by how well rounded and developed this whiskey is. Absolutely great. You can still find these right around the probably about $70 to $80 range. I think it's a must buy. And so Deanston 2008 red wine Bordeaux cask matured is my number 5 whiskey for 2020. Coming in at number 4, GlenDronach 15-year-old Revival. So this was a favorite of the GlenDronach series for many years, but was stopped for a couple of different years and then has now come back on the market. This 15-year-old is delicious. This is a 46% ABV. It is non-chill filtered and natural color. It says it right here on the label. The Revival itself is a mix of Oloroso sherry casks and Pedro Jimenez casks. So you're really getting 2 different types of sherry in this dram, and they play off each other really well. You get a lot of the kind of nutty spice notes mixed with some of the darker dried fruit, which you would get off Oloroso. And then you get a nice sweetness to round things out with that PX sherry. The GlenDronach 15 Revival is one of my favorite whiskeys I've had this year, and is one I'm going to have on my bar all the time. You can find this in the States anywhere from around $80 to $100. Must buy at that price. GlenDronach 15-year-old Revival, number 4 of my whiskeys of 2020. So coming in at number 3 is Lechag, 10 years old. The Lechag 10 is a complete gem. It is a peated whiskey out of the Tobermory distillery. and honestly is a real dark horse that I think fans of smoky Islay whiskeys will love. While Tobermory is not an Islay distillery, they know what they're doing when it comes to heavily peated scotches. You really get a heavy smoke on this, but also a surprising amount of complexity, which makes you almost think this whiskey's older than it is. You're getting some citrus, honey, toffee notes. There's some nice bourbon notes as well as some pepper notes. It all balances really well with the peat and the smoke to give you a great experience. And the best part here, 46%, 46.3% ABV, is unchill filtered. You find this for around $55 in the States. So while it's a little bit more than your average 10-year-old heavily peated scotch, I think you're getting a lot of bang for your buck with this. Highly recommend it, especially if you're into smoky whiskeys. And if you're just getting into them, this isn't a bad place to start. Lechag 10 is number 3 in my top 5 whiskeys of 2020. Coming in at number 2, Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch B520. If you're a fan of this channel, you know that I love Elijah Craig Barrel Proof. I think it's one of the best bourbons for the money on the market. They do 3 releases of these every year. And the reason that this B520, which is the second batch of 2020, is coming in so high for me is that this one really actually took it to the next level. These are really delicious. They're heavily flavored. They're high ABV. This one, for example, 63.6%. They're 12 years old. It's unchill filtered. You know, what Heaven Hill is putting out with these Elijah Craig Barrel Proofs for years now has been fantastic bourbon. But what sets this B520 apart is just how rounded it is. While you're getting those classic heavy bourbon notes that you would expect from a barrel proof, you're not even getting as much of the heat that you normally would get on some of the other releases of this that you can tame down with water. This one is almost just sippable neat without any heat at all. I think this is the real winner, probably the best that I've had out of their series over the last couple of years. You can find these sometimes a little difficult to find, but if you do, you'll see these anywhere from around $65 to $90. I think it's a must buy. This Elijah Craig Barrel Proof Batch B520, total winner, and that makes it number 2 of my whiskeys of 2020. Which brings us to number 1. My number 1 whiskey for 2020 is the Annock 24 years old. Annock, another distillery that I think flies a little bit under the radar, but if you've not yet checked out their line, you're really missing out. But first of all, they have a great presentation. I mean, this is a minimalist style for a 24-year-old. There's no big glossy box. This is non-chill filtered natural color written right here on the label, 46% ABV. And you're just getting so much complexity with this. You get a sweet, sour, bitter, really heavy flavor, dark sherry, bourbon notes. There's a little hint of minerality, which really boosts the viscosity on the palate. And that has to do with where Annock sources its water from. And what I think actually separates it from pretty much all of the others is the price. So right now here in the United States, you can find yourself a bottle of Annock 24 from $200 to $250. That is an absolute steal for a 24-year-old whiskey and pretty much unheard of these days as prices continue to go up and up, particularly on heavily aged whiskeys. I think this is a total steal. So while it is a little bit pricey, I think it's a must buy as this price may not last into the future. And if you are in that place in your whiskey journey where you want to try something a little different, the Annock 24 is really going to check all of the boxes for you. Absolutely fantastic stuff. I'm going to make sure to get myself another bottle of this before potentially the prices end up going up. But Annock 24, this is my 2020 Whiskey of the Year. All right, y'all. So again, thanks so much for all the support this year. I'm looking forward to tasting some new whiskeys in 2020. And you all have a great New Year's, and we'll see you then. Be well.